Behold, my glorious supporter, audioforcez, has asked a simple but mighty question. Why is buildcraft fun? Specifically, audioforcez asks, what makes buildcrafty games fun for you personally and in a general sense? Okay, for me personally, that might seem like a simple answer, but I'm going to answer in general first. One of my quips with reviewing culture, video game reviews in general, is that they really generalize build craftiness. Some people seem to act in reviews like buildcraft is one thing that a game either has or it doesn't, and if you like that one thing, then you like that thing about that game, or you don't. But no, that's obviously not a thing. For the same reason that saying you like board games isn't a thing. What kind of board games? There are many, many board games. They are not similar. They don't have much, and if anything, in common, a lot of them. I guess you use your hands to manipulate objects. I'm sure there are board games where you don't do that too, somehow. Anyway, the point is, I feel like it's not that simple. There are a lot of things you could like about buildcraft. So, like what? Okay, let's just rattle some off. You might enjoy it because you like to customize things. You might enjoy it because you like choices. You might enjoy it because you don't want to choose something, and the game allows you to pick a given option that fits you specifically. It's like you can tailor the game to be only one thing that you like versus tailoring the game to be many things, all of which you're interested in, right? Those are two different things. A game could do both at the same time, but they're very different things. And again, there's the thing about you might just like customizing stuff, in which case just fashion frame, just having customizable appearances could be nice. You might like it because it feels like a puzzle to be solved. You might like it because it's an unsolvable puzzle. You might like it because you like math. You might like it because you like how the systems interact. You might like it because you like having one thing that is this ultimate singular weapon or character. There could be a lot of reasons. You might like how it's a minor element that blends into the background. You might like how everything revolves around these build crafting choices. You might like how it makes a minor but meaningful difference. You might like how it's an overwhelming difference and you can hardly play the game without doing it. You might like simple synergies that result in complex decision making, or complex decisions that lead to simple decision making. Simple choices, simple outcomes. That didn't make sense. You know what I mean? All this stuff, right? I think in general, it's not common for people who say they like buildcraft or think of themselves as liking buildcraft to enjoy things other than choice. So I mentioned in there's a little thing where a game with buildcraft could very well benefit you if you do not want choices. How this would happen is that it allows the game to appeal to a lot of different people while offering an option that lets you customize and have a really simple way of going about it if you want. A good buildcraft allows simple and complicated options, in my opinion. And so if you like simple options, a game with buildcraft good buildcraft is more likely to serve your needs than a game without buildcraft, because that game without buildcraft is either simple or complicated, period. Whereas a game with buildcraft can be made simple or complicated in all likelihood. Not all of them, but that's a common thread, right? So those are all things that I think people in general might like about buildcraft. That is a large question, but that is my abbreviated answer, because I'm going to spend most of my time talking about what I like about buildcraft. I think this will probably be an easier way to discuss what there even is that you could like about buildcraft, right? So let's get started with that. So personally, I like most of that stuff. Most of the things I said I really enjoy. But to me, buildcraft is something where just going through the motions, it being a puzzle that you have to solve and then it's solved, that feels like a waste to me. So the thing I don't like, it's easier to tell you that, is busy work. I don't want to have to figure something out just for the sake of figuring it out. So if something in a game is unclear, it's not that the decision is difficult. It's that knowing what the decision would involve is difficult. I don't like that. I think that's just bad. It's not that I don't like it. I think everybody dislikes it, unless that's all they know, basically. So for example, when I played World of Warcraft, which was vanilla WoW through Wrath of the Lich King, this was a long time ago, there wasn't really buildcraft, really, the way that I would currently think of it, but a lot of people thought there was. A lot of people like that about it, because you pick a character class and then a talent tree, right? And then you don't really choose what abilities to use. You don't choose gear, you just need certain gear with certain gear thresholds, right? And even if you were to kind of choose something different, the way you'd go about that is math. You do the math to figure out whether this thing is just more damage, you know. That's another thing. World of Warcraft, as a game where you're not very mobile overall, is a game, or when I played it, again, I don't know anything about it right now, is a game where you can't be good at very many different things. So I guess we can go in that direction. This is kind of a non-universalized way to talk about it that I don't normally like. But for starters, I like games with buildcraft in them. What makes buildcrafty games fun for me? Being able to be good at multiple different things and having that matter. For example, in Genshin Impact, one of the things I really like about the game is that there's things that would be different about a good open world team versus a good Spiral Abyss team. There are times when you have access to food buffs and times when you don't. There are times when you care about specific elements and times when not so much. There are times when the cost of having one character in play all the time as a primary attacker, a greedy character, are low. There's times when that's not a big deal, and there are times when that's high. There are times when you have plenty of room to move around and times when you don't. So if a character, for example, does a lot of damage by, oh, I don't know, let's say jumping repeatedly and doing plunge attacks. I don't know why that would be a thing. That's totally not a character, but whatever. That's interesting because there are situations in the game where that is not a problem. You can just freely jump up and down and it's fine. And situations where that's a huge problem and you don't have the room to do that, or there's some other issue, right? I can get around shields. One thing I love in Genshin Impact are the shielded enemies. You can break the shield. You can use an element that counters the shield in some way. You can freeze the enemy and hit them behind their shield. You can just flank them and hit them behind their shield. You can hit them with an attack that hits in an area such that they cannot block it with a shield. You can simply avoid attacking them directly and kill them with indirect damage like elemental reactions, electrocharged or some such. That might not be enough on its own, but you get the point, right? Because there are multiple ways for something to be good, and just doing damage really quickly is not the only valuable thing. There are other things: shielding, healing, doing damage in many different ways with many different patterns, different elemental types of damage that you care about at different times, different elemental reactions that can lead to each other, different stats that affect damage, not too many, but not too few. You can't have a game that is just a puzzle to be solved where you just have to do the math, and once you throw enough time at it, then you just have done the thing and you're good to go. That is something I dislike, and so I guess by way of inference, you can see what I like is for a game to have many different ways a thing can be good. I don't think this is hard. I think you need to go out of your way to make a game where multiple things are not good, where there's only one good thing. But sometimes bad balance leads to this. This is one of the many ways in which balance in a PvE game matters a lot in a way that people don't seem to appreciate somehow. There are lots of ways that balance matters in such a game, so I guess I like balanced games. I really appreciate just the artistry of game design. So when something is balanced in a clever way, I really like that. Or the trade-off is just so. I really like how, for example, in Warframe, there's a lot of balance where we don't really know whether it was intended or not, but it's interesting. There's a lot of trade-offs, like, you know, you can restore energy or get a stealth ability this way with a sentinel, or this other way with a beast companion. What are the different pros and cons to doing it those two ways? At lower level missions, how do things change against higher level enemies? When you think about your allies, what are the differences between defense missions and mobile defense missions? What's good in those two different contexts, right? Now in Warframe, there isn't enough challenge for it to matter that much. So I guess another thing that I enjoy is a relative amount of challenge. I want the game to have a challenge gradient, enough things that you care about doing relatively effectively, but that are not super hard, such that you can try something not silly necessarily, but something a bit different. Like everything can be good at most things, and yet the game needs to give you enough challenging environments that you can throw your strongest combos, your strongest build crafted synergies at that thing and enjoy playing with them, right? You need a suitable arena in which to test out your stuff. It doesn't mean the whole game has to be brutally hard. Really, the best way to do this is to have a range of difficulties and a range of ways that you're challenged, not to be challenged the same way every time, not to have a game that only throws a ton of enemies at you, or the AI is not that good, or whatever, and doesn't have too many different objectives, or the consequences of the objectives don't vary very much. You want many different options, right? And I feel like, for example, Genshin Impact does a very good job of that. I also like games that let you build craft something unusual. So I really like Hades letting you build craft the difficulty, and then it kind of with the Mirror of Night and the Pact of Punishment. So you sort of have two elements where you can build craft the game to be harder or easier by build crafting the game to be to have the game be harder or easier, or to have you be more or less powerful, or both. And so you can make the game easier by making yourself more powerful, or by making the game less powerful, the enemy is less powerful. Or you can make the game harder by making yourself weaker, or the game stronger, the enemy is stronger. That's cool. Many different types of weapons with different playstyles. Obviously, that's simple. That's just having options. A big thing I like in build crafty games, that's a good segue to, is economy of elements. I don't like games that have an absurd number of options. That's a droll, I think. It's much more fun to have a game that has a lot of, a collection of elements, but that are all really rich choices. No, fewer choices that are more meaningful, rather than more choices that are less meaningful. I think if you're going to scratch the build crafting itch, you want to eliminate any choices that are not interesting. If loot drops, it should be, as often as possible, the loot should be an interesting choice. And if it isn't, don't just have it not drop. Make the game in such a way where that loot just doesn't exist. I think Warframe does a pretty good job of this. A game I've played recently that does a terrible job of this is Age of Calamity, Legend of Zelda, or Breath of the Wild Age of Calamity, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. A lot of weapons drop, a lot of games are like this. It's not just Age of Calamity, that's just the one I played recently. A lot of weapons drop that have extremely minor stat increases that you would never notice. You get 4% increased damage on a rush attack. No, stop. Just have that weapon not drop. That's silly. Or have loot drop in a different way, so as to not draw attention to the meaninglessness of the choice. I hate it when a game gives you a lot of nearly identical choices. That's silly. Make them meaningfully different, Now, the problem with a lot of this, though, is so far I've mostly been listing things that are not my preference as much as my scholarly belief that they are the best things for a build crafty game. Like, for everything I've said so far, I would argue that it's not that I like it, it's just objectively what makes a game good for having good build craft. So I don't think a lot of people would disagree with most of the things that I've mentioned. So I'm trying to see if I can get to more, if you do, that's fine, whatever. The point I'm trying to make is I'm trying to get to things that are aggressively what I prefer, or my bias, I do like randomness in build crafty games. Some people don't like if your build resets. Think like Hades. There's some randomness. You have a variable amount of control over it. You can control it very heavily if you go pretty far into the game. Many of the people who have not liked Hades for its build craft didn't get far enough in it to be able to control the build craft fully. I'm not saying it's their fault. That could be viewed as a knock against Hades. You could be forgiven, and a lot of reviewers shall be forgiven by me right now, for not understanding that Hades is not a very random game. You can largely control what boons you get, just not early. You have to unlock that, which I think is good overall as a game design thing, but it does cause problems it's the reviewing culture that is to blame for that. But anyway, personally, I like that. I don't mind having your build reset, provided it's easy to get it going again. Something I really don't like are things like what I've heard is the case in Path of Exile, where you make a build, and then if you want to respec, or, you know, do a different class or whatever, you have to start all over again, which that sounds tedious. I don't like grinding. I know you might be saying, Zandy, you play Warframe, so not sure what's going on there. I don't mind some repetition, but I don't like grinding. If I have made, I want the repetition to be making a choice a different way again, like a choose your own adventure experience. I don't want the repetition to be, I just have to meaninglessly repeat this exact same thing again because I need to level my Warframe again to get the Forma on. I hate that. That's my least favorite thing about Warframe. Every time I think about not playing Warframe, it's because of that. Almost every single time. It's just because it's so tedious to put Forma on a Warframe. It's just painful and silly, and I hate it. And that's because I play this game for a living and I have every Warframe with a bunch of Forma. Yes, I know. That being said, it's still pretty silly. Anyway. What else do I like in a game? So we talked a little bit about, I've been trying to define sort of metrics to talk about buildcrafty games by. One of them is called prototyping, or I've been calling it prototyping. Prototyping is how quickly a game allows you to try a build idea. You have the build idea, you give it a go. Now, this usually ignores things like startup cost. In fact, I would say startup should be a different stat. Startup is how much of the game do you need to play before it gets buildcrafty. How long until it gets good, essentially. And you could make an argument that games that you have to wait till they get good are silly. An example for you would be in Hades, the buildcraft tools are not fully available to you right away. You make interesting decisions right away. They lead into the buildcraft you will eventually be participating in, but the full experience is not yet there, right? It's not like it's not that thing yet. It's just not all of that thing yet, right? And so I would view it as the game has a lot of buildcraft, but the startup to the build up, it should be called, to get to the sort of full buildcraft package, that is relatively long in a game like Hades. And in Warframe, for example, it's difficult because you do make decisions early on. You pick different weapons, you pick different Warframes, but you're not modding in a truly interesting way for a little while. There's maybe a moderate amount of build up, right? Until you have enough mods and enough mod capacity on some Warframes that you can make meaningful decisions about, rather than just putting on every relevant thing you have, right? Stuff like that. Like when newer players say, what would be a good new player build for a Warframe? It's like, you can't make any builds. You cannot make builds. There is no such thing as a new player build. Put on the mods that you have, you know. So that if that means there's some amount of build up, right? Prototyping, really good, I think, in games like Warframe. Once you have the tools, you can pretty much just make the thing. Again, in Hades, you can do a run, and it's not infinitely quick prototyping. You have to go get the boons, I guess, but you can pretty readily do that in short order. You will only very rarely get unlucky in such a way that you don't get the boons you're looking for, and even then, it's often pretty interesting as long as you weren't just being greedy about it. Although I do wish Hades would let you test combinations of boons. That would be cool. What are some other examples? So those are a few things, right? Trying to nail down more things that are just my preference about builds. I think that's a lot of it, though. I am still trying to develop terms like this. If you have ideas for them, I would love to hear about them. These things like prototyping and build up in a game. Again, there's sort of an economy of elements. Economy is one you might say. How much does the game focus on many smaller choices rather than a smaller number of more meaningful choices? A game that is really far in the direction of a small number of meaningful choices would be Pyre. There are the minimum number of choices for there to even be choices, but they're all very dense. Every time you make one, it makes a very large difference. Whereas there are other games that shall remain nameless, where there are a ton of choices, but they're all practically meaningless, and you have to make many of them for it to amount to a real change. Go figure. Now, many choices that are all really meaningful, do you want that? Would that be overwhelming? I'm not sure. But I love getting to think about this topic. An invitation to talk about this is a good invitation indeed. So thank you very much for asking, audioforcez. I hope that was an interesting answer to the question that you had in mind. I'm also very curious to hear if other people have input about, again, like metrics for good build craftiness, as this is where I'm going with my work. So help contribute. I would also love to hear what other people enjoy about build crafty games. I'll see you next time.